Hey Josh, can you hear me? Okay.
You there, Harry?
Yeah, I'm here.
How you doing this morning?
Doing well. How are you?
Well, yes. Um, okay, so I was wondering about maybe let's see. Wonder about a PowerPoint for this thing.
The one that Aaron Gabby sent out.
No, just let's see. Here's the one that this is the Habitat Working Group. Um, what's today, the 27th? Okay. And then Zoom. Ensure your name. Well, just thinking of putting something up on the screen as people log in. Okay, so what do we have today? We have pull up the old agenda, which is here. Okay, so I want to put the agenda up on the screen to share. Okay, so basically we're just gonna, okay, I don't need to have a PowerPoint then. I'm gonna, oh, the only thing I wanted to have the PowerPoint for was the basic idea of the mute thing. Ensure your name is displayed, mute your microphone unless speaking. Unless speaking. Um, all right, here we go. So then if I wanted to do that, I would do that. And if I wanted to do this, I would do this, and I would say that. How's that? Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
I am. Or yeah, yeah, it looks good.
Zoom.
Please take the following steps. Breathe patience. Thank you. I like it.
Okay. How about Zoom over here? Should we say?
Zoom protocol.
Just say, welcome to Zoom. Welcome to Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
Welcome to Zoom. Welcome.
I been emailing back and forth with Frank O'Connell this morning. He may not be able to get his iPad to work, so he may just have to call in.
Okay. Frank, come on. I mean, come on, people. Number of people have low-tech computing at home.
Yeah.
More than you would expect.
Yeah.
Okay, and then if I want to get into the stuff, here's the packet, and then here's the memo from ICF, and then that's the contribution respectful. And then the other one would be the presentation. This thing.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to run it from the PDF side versus the, and this has all the stuff in it. Same stuff, right? Yeah, is the memo. Okay, that's the good news. Habitat formula with breakdowns, okay, and then so one thing I don't have here is an email. So I don't want my web browser to show up on the share screen, huh? There's Eric Morgan coming in. I can rename everybody. Eric BLM Morgan. Right, is that Frank O'Connell coming in? Frank O'Connell. Getting high tech over there. There's Steve Matarazzo. He's here. Steve UCM Best Matarazzo. Okay, I'm hearing a little bit of a echo on somebody's. Is it O or is it O? We lost Steve.
And Eric.
People are checking in and checking out.
Imagine once it gets back to 10,
They'll be here.
Yeah, they were just checking their technology.
So when I change people's names on this end, do you see all the changes?
I do, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, then I don't need to ask people to change their own names. I can mostly do it.
Mm. And is Google Hangout the best way to message you about who's raising their hand?
Yes, right. Yes. There's Jen Simon coming in.
Morning, Jen.
Jen the Dongler Simon. Hello, hello. Maybe we need some like elevator music.
Da, 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 da.
Nah, not that. Okay, I like this idea. Maybe some lounge music, like Thievery Corporation or something. Who's got any of that?
No.
Can I play it on my Pandora?
Sure.
Maybe I can. Let me see if this works.
Test it out.
Innovation plus plus.
There's Kendall.
Morning, Kendall.
Okay, hold on now. Let me put this over here. Let me log in, log in. Podcasts. Okay, don't play the death metal. Oh, wait, don't play the reggae. Now, do you guys hear that?
No.
Okay, good. Let's see how this is going to work. Thievery Corporation. Play. So I guess I can't play it for everybody because it's playing right now. Okay, well that's, there's Anya Spear. Anya CSUMB Spear.
Hi, Josh.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
There's Alan Hoffa's with us. Fred Watson representing FORTAG. Sean Anderson. Welcome. There you go. There's some music. Now you're talking.
Some inspirational Mozak.
How'd you get that on there?
I have it on my Mac laptop.
Okay.
Do
Great.
you want me to keep it on or what time
Yeah,
is
just put a little till people come on. We got 8 minutes.
it? Okay.
Chat. Oh, got it. Okay. I'll put this here. Mm. Hi, Vicky.
Hi there.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Well, pretty good. Yeah. I mean, except for the global pandemic, life's pretty good. Okay. Okay. I guess I'm looking up. It looks kind of funny. There we go. Okay. Fred, you got a haircut. One of them, a few of them. All right, there's Hans Uslar. There's Jane. Okay.
Morning, Josh.
Good morning. Okay, there's Craig Malin. Good morning, Craig. Okay, we're getting people. Here comes Gail Morton. There's Lane Long. Good morning, Lane. There's Sherry sitting in the round. Morning, Bill.
Enter your meeting ID.
Okay, we got 4 minutes. Let's see.
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just you are in the meeting now. There are 17 participants in the meeting.
Alan's got his coffee. He's ready. Okay. Let's see here.
Do you want to use my laptop? I can use this. I don't know how that's gonna. Yeah. Well, I just run home and get it. Thank you. Just tell them.
People coming and going. Okay. Morning, Dino.
Morning, Josh.
So Josh,
Yes.
when I was in before, I had muted myself just because I find it's helpful if people are muted when they're not speaking.
Right.
And I couldn't unmute myself, which was kind of weird. So that's why I just reached.
Okay, so there is a control on the meeting host end to do that, and we found that sometimes if you're doing a local control and there's been a kind of system-wide mute, that can cause that problem. So
if we mute ourselves, how do we get your attention? Or
there's a hand raising function.
Okay.
And there's a thumbs up. Perfect. Anything like that would get our attention.
I'm going to go ahead and mute myself.
Okay, and we have Harry in our office who's kind of closely watching the group because it's a large group, and we'll be kind of making sure that we're not missing folks when they raise their hands.
Good.
Yeah. And so I'll sort of support Jane in notifying who's who's raised hands and what the sequence of speakers are and stuff like that. So we did conduct a meeting like this earlier in the week with the admin committee that went fairly well. So we're hoping to reprise that here today, but certainly a larger group and some pretty you know, more technical material that we're going over. So the big encouragement is everybody breathe, and we'll figure out a nice workflow here to get us through it. So just getting everyone on this platform has been a body of work, and it's, you know, we benefited from taking a pause last week on all these meetings, and then with the support of the FORA staff and the RGS team, we've done a fair amount of work to try to get everybody up to speed on the systems and platform and all that. So thanks for everybody who's been working on that. And looks like we're at 10 o'clock, and it looks like we do have a quorum. So Jane, if you're ready, we can call the meeting to order. Let's see if we can unmute Jane. Let's see. You might have to unmute yourself. Okay, there you go.
I
Okay.
think I got it.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks, Josh. And thanks everyone for being here. I'm going to go ahead and call to order the, let's see, are we a regular meeting of our, yeah, we're a,
This
yes,
is a
we're sort of
regular meeting
regular
of the
meeting
Habitat. Yep.
Working Group and special meeting of the FORA Administrative
Right.
Committee. It's Friday, March 27th, 2020. And I think maybe at this very beginning of the meeting, Josh, maybe if you could just go over kind of the meeting protocols, reminding
Sure.
people to keep themselves muted and breathe and all those things. And then we'll get into the body of the meeting.
Okay. Yeah. So I as I mentioned, you know, this is a new format, but hopefully not the first time most people have now been on Zoom. It's a pretty effective platform we've found for doing what we need to do. And for anyone that needs support, if for some reason you find yourself having issues, you can email harry@fora.org. He'll be monitoring his email, and he's sort of become our in-house Zoom guru, as well as with Kendall. But Harry is probably most accessible on the moment. So if you do find yourself needing some help, just email Harry. And otherwise, the idea, mostly keep yourself muted unless you're going to be speaking. And as we mentioned earlier, we'll be paying attention to people raising their hands to speak, and kind of just go through it that way. So I'll be sharing my screen for the most part. I'll hand off once to Aaron Gabby, who's going to take you through the presentation from the ICF team. And otherwise, we'll kind of just be taking it as it comes. So Jane, is that enough intro for you? Okay, great. Let's see if we can.
He can't hear me.
Hold on, we're getting you.
Thank you.
Okay, there you go. Good.
Thank you, Josh. And I do just want to mention that I think for this meeting, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, we are going to take public comment, and we are going to do it in writing only by I think next time. Remind me how we're doing this, because I think with Zoom, we do have the ability to have members of the public raise their hand and be recognized.
We do, yes.
For this, are we going to do that at this meeting, or are we going to ask people to send an email to?
Well, that's what we have set up, was the idea that people would send in email correspondence and we would read the statements. But as we're kind of becoming more familiar and comfortable with the platform, we're finding that you know, it is feasible for us to do public comment kind of as we've done in regular meetings. So I would say we could probably accommodate that.
Okay, great. I just think for this particular meeting, because it's a little bit less formal than the board meeting,
Yeah.
Let's try to do a
Yeah.
public comment by hands raised.
Right.
So with that said, let's move then to public comment. This is public comment on any items not on today's agenda. And if there's any member of the public on in this meeting, if you would use the raised hand feature, and we will recognize you.
Okay, I'm seeing Fred Watson's raising his hand.
Okay, great. Fred,
Let's see
take
if I
it
can
away.
unmute Fred. There you go, Fred.
Madam Chair, yeah, I was able to make a public comment at another meeting this week using what I'm doing right now. It seemed to work fine. So if we could keep that option available, I think that would be good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else in the public wanting to make a comment on an item not on today's agenda?
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands being raised or anyone speaking up.
Great. Well, it's always good to leave a little lag time, but all right, seeing no one further, we will move now to the approval of the March 6th, 2020 meeting minutes. Are there any comments or corrections from board members on the minutes of March 6th? And if you would raise your hand, if you do.
Okay, so one thing we're supposed to do, in just a note by about taking actions, is we need to do a roll call votes. That's kind of part of the state guidance on doing these meetings. So even for minor matters such as this, we would want to do a roll call vote for folks to approve the minutes.
Yes, thank you. And before we do that, so I guess there are no board members with corrections. Any member of the public see anything that needs to be corrected on the minutes from March 6th? I'm not seeing any hands being raised. Then we'll bring it back to this group for action. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
This is John Gagliardi. I make a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Thank you. Motion by Gagliardi. Is there a second? All right, I'll go ahead and second.
Oh, it looks like Hoffa second.
Okay, super.
With the thumbs
Second,
up.
Hoffa. Is there, let's see, there wasn't much discussion, so I think I'll just say, then we'll go directly to the vote. And who's our clerk for the meeting?
That's Harry.
All right, Harry, if you would then conduct a roll call vote.
Sure. Supervisor Jane Parker,
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby,
Have the mayor on. I'm not seeing him. Let's just.
Mayor Ian Oglesby.
Not seeing him here. So.
Okay, I see him on Zoom.
Yes.
Oh, there he is. Okay, great. Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton.
She's here. She was here.
Here. I just tried to unmute her.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Councilmember John Gagliotti,
Yeah, aye.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa,
Aye.
Okay, great.
motion passes unanimously.
Great.
Thank you. Great, thank you. And is it accurate to say that when we get to these roll call votes, that people don't need to worry about unmuting themselves, that Harry will unmute us as we vote? Is that correct? Or do we need to touch our screens or do whatever we need to do to unmute?
I would say maybe unmute yourself just in case. I think it goes two ways, so I can mute you, but also you can mute yourself. So just to be sure, unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Good. All right, we'll be such experts at this one of these days.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So we will move now to our business items. And I think the March 13th meeting recap is kind of a way for us to remind ourselves where we are now. And so Josh, would you get us ready?
Yeah, well, so the big discussion there was on the, we pretty much reprised the same agenda set here. And so the habitat formula review is the subject that we dove into in some depth and received feedback from the group. And we have then worked with the consultant team to refine. We also touched a bit on the transition plan material, but recognizing that really the critical decision was the work of this habitat formula. And I'm seeing Alan raising his hand. So do you want to go ahead, Alan? And okay, hold on. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, so we're not going to be able to unmute ourselves. We can't. We don't have that ability. So basically, when it comes to a vote or something, Harry needs to unmute us. And then secondly is a question regarding process. In the past, administrators voted from the jurisdictions voted. Is this different, or was that sort of not proper last time? I'm just asking.
Good questions. We reviewed this during the week, and the members of the committee, the ad hoc committee, are the 5 appointed board members. So that's yourself, Jane, Ian, John Gagliotti, and Gail Morton. So those would be the members that would vote on the recommendation from the committee to the board. Yeah, and so just by way of, finishing where we were on the 13th, we also tabled the JPA discussion until such time as it would be ripe, and that would be informed by the deliberations on the habitat formula and all of that. So that's kind of where we are. And like I said, the team from ICF and DDA and staff have been working on the refining the allocation method, the proposed allocation methodology. So we'll be able to get into that. Aaron, Gabby will be doing a briefing on that. As you all may have received in your inbox, we also received communication last night from the city of Seaside, and I see Craig Malin just raised his hand. So that there would that material could also be discussed. But let's see, where's Craig here? Can we unmute Craig? Okay, Craig, I think you're up.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Josh. I guess I have a fairly simple question. I understood this meeting to be both a Habitat Working Group meeting and a special meeting of the admin committee. So, but I just heard that the admin members are not voting. So if someone could explain that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
So the thinking was that if there's a recommendation from the Habitat Working Group, that the 5 members would be the ones to make that recommendation. While it is a meeting of the special meeting of the admin, the reason for doing that was to allow the pairing of the policymakers and the administrators in the same meeting. So if I think the option, and this would is perhaps posed as a question, would be that if there was to be, if the interest of the admin committee members was to also weigh in with a recommendation, that could be framed as a vote could be taken among those members, and it could be framed as distinct from the Habitat Working Group recommendation. Is that fair, Jane?
I think that works well. Certainly the admin committee members will be part of the discussion. They are likely to agree with the elected official from their jurisdiction, but I do think the board appreciates the voice of the admin committee. So I think rather than subsuming it in under the Habitat Working Group, having it be a separate vote would be appropriate, and would allow those the members of that committee, and for that committee itself as a body, to be heard at the board meeting as well.
Okay, are you okay with that response, Craig? Okay? And I saw not Alan Hoffa, but Hans Uslar with a clapping. Was that a hand raising or just a supporting the? That was a hand raising. Okay, so I saw Hans Uslar with a comment. So Hans, I think you need to press the unmute on your end.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So can somebody again explain to me why we had one procedure in place until today, and then why we changed horses in the middle of the week, and we weren't told that until right now? That would help us a little bit more to understand what the challenge is. Thank you.
Yeah, so really the challenge has been that so far there hasn't been a recommendation having to deal with financial matters to the board, and so the focus was on how that recommendation would be most appropriately brought to the board, and the conversation with Authority Council led us to this position.
And
we were doing consensus kind of recommendations versus a formal vote, I guess is what could be said.
And if I may, yes, we were voting and everyone was voting. I think one of the things that has gotten us to this more sharpened pencil version of things is the need to hold roll call votes as part of this remote meeting protocol. And that meant that council went back and looked at kind of the rules of the road and determined that the Habitat Working Group is one entity and the administrative committee is another, so that the votes should essentially be separate. So it's a combination of things. And so I hope that we can continue to just have the discussions as we've been having them with everyone participating. And then when it comes time for the vote, we do just have to take it as a roll call. And so it would be good if the admin committee wants to have a recommendation also to the full board of FORA, which you often do, thank you, that you would take your own vote as you do normally in your committee. And I apologize if it feels like I don't know, like a big change or that it's rude. I don't think that's the intention. It's just that we're trying to figure out how to do these remote meetings in the way that is very strictly following what we should be doing. So, okay, so let's move now to the discussion at hand, and it's my sense that this habitat formula recommendation is what we are trying to get to today. So we had a good discussion last time, and I think there is further discussion to be had. And I would hope that, you know, in the course of the next hour or so, we can have a good discussion, look at all of our options, and then be ready to make a recommendation to the full board. So looks like Aaron Gabby is queued up to give us a presentation, and then we will launch into questions and then discussion. Thank
Okay,
you.
I'm gonna pass the sharing of the screen or I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and then Aaron's gonna take up on his end. Are you ready for that, Aaron?
I am.
Okay. And then I think that prior to Aaron beginning, that Kendall from RGS will be giving a bit of an intro to help us kind of set the context for what we're looking at. So Kendall, do you want to go ahead and do your piece and then let Aaron take it from there? I'm not hearing Aaron, Kendall. Hold on, let's unmute Kendall. Oh, I'm not seeing Kendall.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, there you go.
Okay, so basically as a reminder, what we discussed at the was essentially taking a look at these different alternatives, and I believe several members asked us to clarify more closely funds that had already been expended or given to UC Santa Cruz. So what Aaron's going to go over is basically the 4 scenarios that we were asked to come back and take a look at, and then there's further kind of dialing down in that in terms of the funds that were already expended, how they would affect the distributions moving forward, and kind of what that all looks like. So just keeping in mind, these were the 4 that were presented by ICF last time around. I believe that Craig will have an alternative that we might want to discuss following that, but this is sort of the setup for where we're at right now. So with that, I'm going to give it over to Aaron.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kendall. These are, as Kendall just mentioned, we're going to just do a quick review of the 4 alternatives that we discussed really the last 2 weeks. And I'm just going to go over it briefly under the assumption that you've seen and heard this quite extensively. But if you have any questions, Josh, are you managing the hand raising? And
yeah, so I'll be the one to kind of set the, you know, acknowledge people and set the order. I think and just a note for members and folks on the call, all of these materials that we're looking at are also on the Habitat Working Group webpage at FORA.org. So if you want to have a copy yourself.
Great. So these are the 4 alternatives that we've been working with the last couple of weeks, or HWG meetings. The first one, I think we first daylighted on the 6th of March. The CFD funds are allocated to the jurisdictions of the county and the cities only. Alternative 2, they're allocated to all, it's allocated to all jurisdictions. Alternative 3, the funds are allocated to the county, the cities, the university, and the college, and state parks and regional parks are excluded. And then alternative 4 is CFD funds are allocated to the county, Seaside, and Monterey City based on the percentage of total fee contribution to date. And so, as Kendall was discussing, the result of integrating the previously distributed funds to UCSC means that the total amount allocated to habitat management of the CFD funds is 17 some odd million dollars. And that includes approximately $1,000 previously distributed to UCSC. This value, 16,600,000 approximately, was the value we had been using in the past 2 working group meetings and the material sent for those 2 meetings. So we include the total allotment, which varies under different scenarios. So I'll go over that when I show you the summary tables. So the summary tables that we're going to show are somewhat streamlined from the Excel files just to hide some of the sheets, and they're also in PDF form. So we're not going to go through all the details and all the assumptions again that we talked about the last couple of times. So I'll do this quickly here. This is with just, let's see if it's big enough. This is just the total allocation based on the county and the cities. And I will show you at the end a summary page that includes the total allocation by entity at the end of this presentation. Okay, so this is what you've seen before. And the total amount is 16 million. So because we're not including UCSC or University of California in this analysis, in this assumption, we just assume that the total amount is 16.6 million and acknowledge it in the footnote, but there isn't any adjustment to the table. Okay. This is allocation alternative 2. Okay, now this one is with all the jurisdictions included. This is the same as before. Now what we've done this time is assume or incorporate the funds that were previously distributed to the University of California. So the total amount allocated is this 17,400,000 approximately. And so the same process to come to the total allocation. So this is gross, the value here, and this column includes the funds already received or distributed. So the 840,000 for UC, and this is the net. So under this scenario where the entities are all receiving CFD fund allocations, still have the 16 million net that already takes into account the 840,000. Okay. This is alternative 3, very similar to the last one, except regional and state parks are not included. Same total allocation because University of California is. Total allocation amongst the 17.4 million minus the funds already distributed to the net. It's a little large. Okay, this was the alternative 4, allocation by the amount of CFD funds contributed. We're again using the 16 million here as the total funds to be allocated, and essentially footnote the amount that has been previously distributed to University of California. And this is the same as you had seen 2 weeks before. So again, the 16.6 total million. And to summarize, this is all the alternatives together so you can really compare the different alternatives and the outcomes. So with that, I'll just open it up to the discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron. Let's see.
Josh, before we get into general discussion, I wonder if Craig Malin would like, or someone from the city of Seaside would like to walk us through what their option is, just so we have it in our minds for discussion. And then I would also like to suggest something that the Board of Supervisors took action on this week as another permutation of this to consider.
Okay. I can either pass sharing of the screen to you, Craig, or I can put your slide deck up on the screen and step through it as you talk.
How about, Josh, if you put the slide deck up and go through
Okay.
it.
Okay, hold on 1 minute here. Let me get that. Okay, can everybody see that? The title slide here from Craig. Let's see. Okay. So this is the first information.
Right. So thank you, Josh, and thank you, Jane. What I've tried to do is flesh out a little bit more what I presented last time, which really tries to bridge the gap between alternative 1 and alternative 4. And alternative 4 is probably not regional in nature, in that we leave some of our land use jurisdictions out. Alternative 1 has the entity with the largest budget by an order of magnitude, sort of get a windfall. So these are the contributions. And if you could go to the next slide, Josh, that's great. These are the distributions under alternative 1. And you can see that Seaside and Marina in particular takes a fairly significant loss, while Monterey County, and wish the county all the best, but their budget is, again, an order of magnitude larger than some of the other land use jurisdictions. So let's go to the next slide. So what I did is I provided 80% of the funding under alternative 1, so that every land use jurisdiction gets something. And then by way of how much of the total contributions came from Monterey County, Marina, or Seaside, tried to get to the $634,000 number that gets split between Delray Oaks and Monterey. Go to the next slide. And then this would be the result. So you have sort of 3 big pieces to this. Every land use jurisdiction gets something. The land use jurisdictions that have paid don't suffer huge losses. And the land use jurisdiction with the largest budget by an order of magnitude does not get a windfall. So that's the policy ideas behind this concept. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, but it's pretty simple.
Thank you. Thank you, Craig. Thanks for putting that forward. So that's another way of thinking about this that people are welcome to include in the discussion. And then the one that I wanted to mention that the Board of Supervisors voted to ask people to consider, and that we would like to put forward, is essentially option 1, that's based on the acreage that the jurisdictions have responsibility to manage for habitat. So I think option 1 is, it makes a lot of sense. What the Board of Supervisors talked about was including Monterey Peninsula College's acreage, about 200 acres, in the county's acreage, and then adjusting the funding accordingly. And this is the reason, so this is essentially the option excluding the, well, and the thinking is this: the other educational institutions were allocated lands that have a good deal of development potential. And so they do have and will have the ability to generate further revenue to fund their habitat responsibilities. Monterey Peninsula College has two differences. One is that the county engaged in a land swap with Monterey Peninsula College that shifted its area to have a good deal more habitat responsibility than its previous location did. And then the second feature is that Monterey Peninsula College does not have lands, other lands in its allocation that are able to be converted into development, so to provide an economic revenue stream for them. So the county would like to work with MPC on the habitat management of those lands that MPC has, and have that allocation of acreage and corresponding money allocation from this CFD pot go to the county as a result. So that's the thinking behind this little tweak that the county was thinking about. So with that, let's open it up to thoughts and comments from others about how you think it's best to allocate this habitat money to the jurisdictions that have habitat responsibilities.
Okay, Janice, Michael Harrington had raised his hand from MPC's law firm, and I saw Alan Hoffa.
Great. So Michael and then Alan.
Hi, Jane, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just had a question with respect to the proposal that Jane put forward. In the event that the county is going to include MPC lands in their inventory and use them for calculating the proportionate share of the funds, is the county also going to agree to assume all of MPC's habitat management obligations?
That's the idea, that the county would work with MPC to work out the habitat plan and to take care of those responsibilities. Yes.
Okay, so would that be memorialized in a kind of side agreement, for lack of a better?
I think that would be a prudent move.
Okay, so I think NPC's concern would be that, and I think that makes some level of sense, but NPC's concern would most likely be that the county not have control over the character and timing of NPC's use of the land. In other words, they would be able to use that management as a means of influencing how NPC is able to otherwise use the lands in question.
Yes, I think that with any of these lands, there's going to be a measure of conversation about how we balance what are we doing for our habitat responsibilities and what does that mean as far as other uses. So I think that would need to be worked out. It depends a lot on the species and the level of protections that will be needed and all of that. So I think, and also the amount of money that we have to do anything. So yeah, I think it all is going to depend, and it would be part of those conversations and negotiations.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So Alan Hoffa was next, and then Gail Morton.
Hi, everybody. So just sharing a couple of thoughts. First of all, in response to what James said, I think it's a valid distinction, and one that whatever option we end up using, I think it really does make sense. The jurisdiction, in this case, I guess the county, some jurisdiction, to really work out an MOU with MPC, since they don't have a revenue generating capacity to help pay for the habitat. And so I think that idea makes sense. Whichever alternative we take, I think that should be a part of it if the county and MPC are willing. And then secondly, I would just say I also kind of like the seaside proposal. I think it isn't fair to only look at contributions, because contributions were made with the understanding that it was a regional approach and that all of the habitat needs to be managed. So I think under the first option, my concern is that it might leave Seaside in a position where it would not be funded in a way that's fair. And I just close by saying, I think we all have an interest in making sure that everyone feels okay with whatever is decided, because I mean, I think the worst outcome would be somebody feels like they've been treated unfairly or in a way that's not consistent with the base reuse plan and ends up suing. And we don't want to have a lawsuit that continues on post FORA. So those are just my thoughts.
Thank you. And then Gail.
So I just am concerned that we have the HMP somehow, the habitat management responsibilities completely driving the division of the CFD fees. And so from my perspective, I just want to continue to point out that all of these percentages, except for Seaside approached it a little bit differently, and I'm trying to find some place that takes into account the responsibilities that the city of Marina has. The assumption of the CFD formula was to generate sufficient funds to do the habitat responsibilities from the impacts of development, not just the HMP. And so when you're taking that out of the equation, what you're allocating to the cities, that most particularly the city of Marina, our projects are already entitled. So we're set under this formula. We've contributed significantly under this formula, and then we're still met. We have the responsibilities for the impacts of development going forward, and the money is sitting in this FORA pot. And so I'm trying to make sure that we're all focused on what was CFD related to impacts of development and not strictly habitat management areas. Thank you.
Okay. I didn't have any other, I'm not seeing any other hands being raised.
So I have a question, Gail. Maybe could you clarify? So your thought about that we're not just talking habitat here, what would that mean in terms of the formulas that are before us? Or
so what I'm looking at is I think that Craig Malin's slides give us what the contributions are to meet habitat obligations. Those jurisdictions have contributed that amount. And so I understand his compromise in giving Delray Oaks and Monterey some additional funds, but also that when we're already stuck on entitled projects, the concept here about doing our impacts of development, we all thought we were going to have a base-wide permit, which we're not going to have. So we're going to have responsibilities on impacts. Marina, because our projects are already entitled, we're not able to say to the developer, we need you to pay for the impacts of your development. That's in this formula. We're locked in. We're still trying to collect that. The county for your East Garrison, you're actually in the same boat with that. So what are those responsibilities and what is the financing to get that done? And some of that is in this pot of 16 million that's sitting with FORA. And I think Craig is trying to address that in his formulation. Not sure it's the exact right formula, but I think it's the right idea that also needs to be weighed, not just Aaron's screen, which is strictly habitat management areas.
so are you suggesting that a combination of what Craig is suggesting with acreage, that there was some other blending like that happened? Because
I'm not sure it needs to be acreage, but I'm just indicating that if we are limited, the entitled projects are already limited on the structure and the ability to raise funds to meet the habitat management, our hands are tied. So if you give all of this money in the habitat management formulas, you're not taking into account also the impacts of development. So if we're developing, for example, we're already entitled and we're doing phase 3 of the dunes and there's San Gilead, we've got to take care of that. And the contribution from the developers are set.
Okay.
Right, but they haven't been received yet. So, I mean, part of the challenge for Monterey County is just what you were saying, is that Monterey County has generated the lion's share of its available development dollars. And this is the amount, the $17 million is the amount that's set aside for habitat. And the county has 1,600 acres that we are responsible for today to manage. So we're really looking at and I think, you know, to a certain extent, Marina is in a similar situation. You already have some obligations for habitat and so this is past money that and so depending on our ability to bring in more money to deal with habitat, Marina has some ability to do that. Seaside has ability, Monterey and Delray Oaks have the ability because there's still development to come, but the county doesn't. And so that's where really basing it on existing acreage today that we already have responsibility for this particular pot of money is the logic that makes the most sense to me. But anyway, so I guess there are probably others who would like to weigh in on this.
Yeah, so I've got Melanie Beretti, Craig Malin, Wendy Stremling, and Ian Oglesby. So Melanie, you would be next, I believe. Let's see if we can unmute Melanie. I think you need to unmute yourself, Melanie, on your end. There you go. You're unmuted, but there I heard your.
Can you hear?
Yeah, now you go. Yep.
Yeah, I think I think it's just looking at. I just want to echo the looking at from a regional perspective how the CFD was set up and how that lands versus the development lands versus actual potential for development are split out. I think shifting completely some formula, even if it's a modified one, that takes into account how much habitat management lands are available is key to not lose sight of, in my opinion. I understand that it looks very disproportional to have the county as a huge, I guess, apparent windfall recipient of funds, but that doesn't accurately represent the regional approach by which, because the county happens to be the unincorporated areas, that provided for the county to have such a significant proportion of those habitat management lands and responsibilities, upon which all of the base development was assumed and predicated. That was a decision made. So while I do understand I understand the perspective of where Seaside, where Craig, your approach is coming from, but I think it loses sight of kind of the regional intention and the regional burden of habitat and regional benefit of that goes to all areas and development lands, which actually can generate future funds to provide for mitigation for those projects and those habitat impacts in the future.
Okay. Next was Craig Malin. Let's see if we can get Craig unmuted here. Okay, Craig, you should be good to go.
Okay, thanks, Josh. I'm going to advocate for my idea just a little bit, and then I'll be quiet and listen to others. In listening to Gail, what's apparent to me is that other than alternative FORA, which leaves some of our sister and brother cities behind, there's no proposal that is as advantageous to Marina than the one that I put forth. And in regard to the county's obligations, I understand those and I appreciate those. But the part of the truth is that the county has made decisions and anticipates continuing the decisions to reduce the amount of land that can be developed in the county and thus increase their habitat expenses. And again, I appreciate those as county decisions, but those are not decisions that Seaside citizens or Monterey citizens or Delray Oak citizens or Marina citizens made. And thus I, as we wrestle with what's the right, approach, I've just tried to focus on allowing the land use jurisdictions to make their own decisions and not have any single land use jurisdiction be left behind or get a significant windfall. That's the idea behind my approach.
Okay. So going down the list, I think Wendy Stremling was next. Wendy, do you have comments?
Yeah, can you hear me? Because I just
Yes,
unmuted.
that's right.
So I just want to address the question of the dollars already contributed, okay? And this relates in part to something I think Gail and to some extent what Craig has said. I mean, if the dollars were already contributed, they were paid by entitled development, I assume, as conditions of approval. So the dollars were paid and 30% set aside to address the impact of that already entitled development. And keying off what Melanie said, at that time, at least the CFD was set up so that the mitigation was regional, with the counties having the lion's share of the land, so that the CFD, the past CFD contributions go towards mitigation, and that mitigation is, to a large degree, 80% of it is county managing the HMA lands. That's already mitigating. Essentially, the dollars that were collected from Marina and Seaside and the county are being spent for the purpose for which they were collected. That is habitat management, the lion's share of which is on county property or county owned. So, going the future, that's different, how you're going to address, how you're going to mitigate future development. But it seems to me that the 80% going to the county is actually just fulfilling the purpose for which the contributions were made. And so it is fulfilling those developments in Marina and Seaside's mitigation obligations. If I have some facts wrong, let me know, but that's how its structure seems to me.
Thank you. Just by way of speaking order, we had Ian Oglesby, Lane Long, and then I saw Melanie back, and then Dino, and then Alan Hoffa again. So Ian.
Okay, I think I unmuted myself. Can you hear me, Josh?
Yes.
Okay. I've been listening to what everybody's saying, and it makes a lot of sense. But when you're talking about there's 4 different alternatives, then I want to make sure Seaside's, we offer up Craig's as the 5th alternative as we go forward. I think that's the fair alternative. I just heard what Wendy said, and I understand that. But again, if the county is choosing to reserve all of their land for undevelopment and habitat protection, then that's a call that they're making. And so if there's 4 different alternatives, then it has to be a possibility for a fifth alternative. So I want to make sure that Seaside's fifth alternative is included in any packets that go forward. Thank you.
Okay, we can do that. Lane was next. Let's.
Great, thank you.
Okay, good.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
So I really like Seaside's proposal. I think it is a good option that addresses and hits a good balance. It hits the balance of the amounts that you've contributed, but it also diverts some money back to Monterey and Delray Oaks that helps to meet their needs. All the money that Marina contributed, it was not the bulk to go to the HMA in the county. We still have other obligations for our existing developments, not just future developments. And so I think Seaside has a good proposal that kind of splits that balance, that addresses the amount that you've contributed, gives that money back, helps to make Monterey City and Delray Oaks whole, and helps us to address our current, and we have pathways also forward for future development.
Thank you, Lane. Next was Melanie.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes.
So I think I just want to factually clarify something. The county has not made a mass policy decision to have all of our developable lands not go under development. We have, through the long range property management plan, the successor agency transferred some properties with the intention of open space recreation. That being said, we have in fact pursued development on some of our properties that have politically failed, as we've all experienced. I think one thing I would like to add to this conversation, if we're really talking about habitat versus development potential, even if you look at the numbers, the county got, I believe, and I couldn't find my numbers, but we can get them. The county gets, I think we have what, we have the lion's share of the habitat, and we got maybe 40% of the total developable property. And so I think if you want to have a conversation, rather than looking at my development or this development for my jurisdiction contributed, but you want to bring in the concept of development potential, I can understand that, but at least it should look at, again, proportional share of what the development potential is in each jurisdiction, of which the county is significantly kind of off balance between development potential and habitat management lands, by the way the regional plan came into play.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Next was Dino, and then we saw Gail raised her hand. So it'll be Dino, Alan, and then Gail.
Thanks, Josh. And through the chair, I just want to speak in support of Alternative 5 proposed by Seaside. I think clearly Alternative 1 favors Delray Oaks financially, but I think that Alternative 5 and the idea and the way the idea is being proposed by Craig and the city of Seaside gets to a notion of fairness that that resonates with me and with our team. I think that going forward, the city of Delray Oaks, it's no secret, will require significant assistance in mitigation in order to develop our lands. And so again, Alternative 1 might help us financially the most down that road. But I think as we try to make collaborative decisions that are best for the region, I just want to voice my appreciation for the proposal made by Seaside, and though it is a reduced amount from Alternative 1, Delray Oaks strongly supports it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dino. So Alan was next.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions and then I'll just kind of share where I'm at. So one question kind of had to do with, my neighbor just turned on his darn thing. Gail was talking about kind of the purpose of the CFD, and I don't know if we have our attorney on the call, but
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
If he could speak to that. So were the CFD, is that language such that it implies that the money has to be spent on habitat for the associated project? So that's one question. The second question was kind of prompted by Wendy, and that had to do with 80% of the mitigated lands being county lands. And so honestly, that I kind of understand. So I guess this is really maybe a question for you, Josh. Does that 80% sort of accurately reflect where the mitigation for the developments that have happened is coming from? And then my comment is, I feel like the group is gravitating towards consensus around the seaside proposal, and I feel kind of inclined to support it too, because I think that it is trying to achieve the intent of the overall regional aspect of the FORA plan. I would say that if we go that route, that I hope the jurisdictions would work out MOUs with MPC to help them. And I think Monterey would be willing to forego our 36,000 and direct that to MPC. At least it might help them at first. Oh, and I had one other question, Josh.
Okay.
With another statement that I think might have been Ian or Wendy made about, can the lands that MPC or the county have, could the designation be changed? Or was the condition of receipt of the lands from the Army such that now they're locked in? Because if the designation could be changed and they could sell those lands for revenue generation, or they could change the use designation for some of it to generate revenue, then I think that kind of changes things a little bit. So I think I had three questions, and then like I said, I in general, I'm leaning towards the seaside concept.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Let's see, Gail was next, and then I know David Willoughby is on the line and should be able to address your first question, and then we can kind of take the other ones up as they come. I think the simplest one, well, let's do it like that. So Gail, are you ready? Okay, and then I saw Dino had raised his hand, so maybe we'll do Gail, then Dino, and then see about David Willoughby.
So I agree that the seaside model should be alternative 5, and I suppose between alternative 4 and alternative 5, the city of Marina, it would be a council decision, but it's not that big of a difference in distinction, and I do understand the desire to put money to Monterey and Delray Oaks. What I wanted to go to was what both Wendy Stremling and Melanie both were talking about, is that the county had 80% of the responsibility to fulfill mitigations of development. So is the representation being made that as long as we provide the sums to the county is going to meet Marina, Seaside, everybody's mitigation measures that are necessary on their properties? Is that what's being articulated with the money that they are getting here, that they would be managing that? And to Melanie's point about looking at developable land, what I'm trying to indicate in my earlier comment, and I will reaffirm, developable land, if Marina has land that we're going to develop in the future, we understand that we are going to have to create an impact fee that has some nexus on the impacts of habitat and collect that fund from a developer. where Marina is precariously is that we've already entitled the developments on former Fort Ord within our city based on this habitat model that we thought this contribution was going to meet the obligation of what would be required of us from now ad infinitum. And so this chunk of money is what was collected to meet those habitat mitigations. And my third question about the areas that were preserved, if in fact the county were taking this money, and if there were transfers of land to the city of Marina, for example, Whispering Oaks area, the landfill, etc., would the county be also transferring a portion of these funds if they received them? Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Gail. Now, Wendy, do you want to respond to that? I saw you raise your hand, and then we had Dino and David Willoughby after that, but just to keep the conversation flowing, let's see if we can unmute Wendy Strimling there.
Thank you, Josh. I had a little bit of a hard time hearing Gail because it was very muddled, the sound, but I do have a question. And this is maybe for Aaron from ICF or Aaron from DDA. The 79.9% in alternative one, my understanding, that's HMA. That's habitat management or borderland that were required under the habitat management plan to do habitat management. That has nothing to do with, our future plans about whether we want to develop the other lands that the county has. So I think, if I remember, that's the basis of alternative one. So in other words, the 80% is obligated. We have no choice. That's the condition under which the land was transferred from the Army to FORA and ultimately from FORA to the jurisdictions under that HMP. If I'm wrong, I'd like to know, but I'd like to clarify that. I'd like the Aarons to just explain again what those percentages are in alternative one, because that has nothing to do with Board of Supervisors decisions going forward. And that's also why I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if county manages those 80% with the CFD, that's also mitigating for Seaside's and Marina's developments for which they've already collected CFD money.
Okay, to keep this string going, I know we have the questions from Alan Hoffa, but just to keep the string going, I would go to Aaron Harwain and then Aaron Gabby, and then we'd go back to Dino and David. And Melanie, I saw you too, Melanie. So Aaron Harwain, do you want to go ahead and respond?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Wendy is correct. Under alternative one, those are the HMP obligations through your deed restrictions, doing that HMP cost model that ICF did and how those percentages are distributed throughout. So yes, alternative one is what you need to do. What I'm hearing is some confusion about mitigation for existing and future development. The HMP, as you guys know, is an agreement between the federal agencies, the Army and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has said that implementing the HMP would mitigate for loss of species and habitat for the reuse and disposal of the base, including all the development activities within all the development parcels. So basically what you could think of is that Monterey County's $13 million right there provides for the mitigation of species loss within all development parcels existing and future. Now, where this gets dicey is that we no longer have a path forward for a HCP, a base-wide HCP. So what that money doesn't cover is any individual jurisdictions and development projects. If they need a take permit, that's going to require additional mitigation, which is not accounted for future projects in this amount. Hopefully that helps clarify, and I'll mute myself again.
Okay, Aaron, Gabby, did you want to add anything to what Aaron Harwain said?
No, she said it well. I think it has to be thought of in the context of which the assumptions in which the CFD funds were paid and what they were used for. So I think in that sense, the total amount of land that would be managed under, or would have been managed under the HCP, is the amount that would in total mitigate for all the development, all the allowable development under the HCP. And so that same concept without the permits is under the HMP. So in some ways, by splitting apart every entity that has management responsibilities that falls under the umbrella of the mitigation provisioning side will not get the full amount that they would have needed to do the work under the regional plan. And on the other side of the coin, those that were intending to use the habitat conservation plan to mitigate for effects and development on their land now won't have that benefit of easily accessible mitigation land unless they work something out with those that have the HMAs. So that's all I have to add to what Aaron said.
Okay, thank you. So just to keep our speaking order, we had Dino, and then we had David Willoughby to address the question from Alan Hoffa about the purpose of the CFD, and then we have Melanie and Lane from Marina. So Dino.
Josh, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, no question from Dino. So David Willoughby.
Okay, as I understood the gist of Councilman Hoffa's question, it was whether there was more or less a lockstep relationship between CFD funds collected as a consequence of one project and the expenditure of those funds on mitigating the impacts resulting from that project. And I would say that lockstep relationship does not exist. The funds that were collected need to be spent for the overall purpose of habitat management, but they don't tie directly back to the discrete project from which any particular dollar moved from a jurisdiction into FORA's accounts. As long as the collected funds are spent for the purpose of habitat management anywhere within the overall base, I see that as fitting with the purpose for which the funds were collected. Did that address the gist of your question?
2 thumbs up from Alan. Okay. There was just while we have you, David, there was this question about conveying the money, and would the funds need to be conveyed? Could the funds be conveyed directly to individual jurisdictions, or are there some other constraints on how the CFD funds that were collected would need to be conveyed?
Well, there's a fairly lengthy answer to that. The Mello-Roos Act specifically identifies one mechanism for transferring the funds that would be feasible if a JPA were to be performed. And we've talked about that one, and that is a fairly square fit within what the Mello-Roos Act describes as an authorized means of transferring funds. The Mello-Roos Act, actually in the same section of the Act, describes the option of entering into a joint community facilities agreement, and we are currently analyzing whether it would be feasible, instead of forming a JPA, to enter into a series of these joint community facility agreements, one with each individual recipient of funds. the agreement would allocate responsibilities for habitat management and allocation of the CFD proceeds. And the concept that we're analyzing is whether we could set that up to say that FORA will have no responsibility past its sunset, and that the recipient agency would carry the project forward using the allocated funds. So I'm reviewing examples of those kinds of agreements and seeing if we can kind of fit a little bit of a square peg into a round hole to fall within this this explicit authorization under the Mello-Roos Act. I might also comment that the Mello-Roos Act does not appear to contain any explicit prohibitions against the kind of direct transfers, and we've been working through perhaps a handful of different ways in which we could expend the money before FORA's sunset. That is a little bit more of a situation of uncharted waters, because although we can't find an explicit prohibition against doing it, there isn't any authorization either. So we're continuing to noodle through that. But I think I can say that even if no JPA is formed and we don't take what is perhaps the clearest authorized means of transferring the funds, that we will be able to find a way to make transfers of the funds outside the framework of a JPA.
Okay, well that's key. That's key information. So thank you, David. We have just the hand raising order has been Melanie, Lane, Aaron Harwain, and Jane. But Jane, as chair, if you wanted to interject, this.
I would like to keep my hand raising order for a comment, but I did want to just say that I think once we get maybe to me, it would be a good time to open up for public comment. So obviously people who want to, I'll open up that and then I'll ask people to raise their hands for that. But if there are any people who are participating who might want to make a written comment, this would be the time to start thinking about that, so you have time to compose it. Okay. And Josh, could you say again, if someone's going to submit a written public comment, what the email address is that they would send it? Yeah,
just send it to board@fora.org, and we'll
that's
receive that.
BOARD.
That's right. And
Thank
just for process, we're at 11:20. And we're set to conclude this meeting at noon. So with that, the next in line was Melanie.
Thanks, Josh. Just very quickly, I wanted to respond. Gail, you'd asked the question with regards to in an alternative one or an alternative that allocates the funds based on habitat management responsibilities. The way that the county views it is the dollars go based on the acreage, and there would be an assumption that should some of those properties transfer with that responsibility, that those accounting, that would be taken into account, essentially. So that's been my intention all along is, should properties transfer to the city of Marina, that would be then you would receive a higher percentage of the habitat funds and we would have less, so we would receive a lower percentage of habitat funds. That was all.
Okay, thank you. Lane was next.
I'll be quick. I think Aaron Harwain made my point. When we're going down the path of the HCP, all the county property would have addressed all of our marinas mitigation, but we are not going down that path. It doesn't look like that'll happen. Therefore, I think there's a need for us to have those funds internally for us so that we can meet our future HCP needs.
Okay, thank you, Lane. Aaron Harwain.
Great. I think I misspoke in that I said alternative one identifies all the costs for HMP activities. I realized alternative two would divvy up that money by all the entities that have HMP responsibilities, which include the educational institutions as well as the parks, and just remembering that everyone has these responsibilities, but alternative one just looked at doing that by jurisdiction. So I apologize for any confusion.
Okay. So Jane, you were next.
Thank you. And I realized that I have a comment, and I can save that until after public comment, since we have, we're getting close to the time when we need to take an action and make a recommendation. So I'll open it up now for public comment. Are there any members of the public who would like to raise their hand and speak to this item?
Seeing Christy Markey. So not seeing others, so let's go ahead and go with Christy.
Sounds good.
I have a question, I guess, for the consultants. I don't know if it could be answered today, but given that the habitat management areas were set aside as mitigation for the transfer of the base to all of the cities, going back to the point that was raised earlier, which is, the county ended up with that property only because that's where the boundaries were. The land that was set aside for habitat happened to land in the county because that's where the species were and that's where the open space was. And so the county ended up with a lion's share of the properties, but the mitigation is for everybody. The mitigation is for development in Delray Oaks. It's for development in Monterey and Seaside and Marina. So it really feels grossly unfair for the group to now talk about not giving the county the money needed for the habitat. But more importantly, if we can't fulfill the obligation, I don't know about under federal law, but under state law, if you don't fulfill your mitigation under a kind of master plan like this, then all development can be halted. So it's just something to think about, that could be a remedy for failure to fulfill the HMA obligations, and the county does not have the money. The county, like everybody else, is struggling with the economic impacts of the coronavirus. We're going to have a very difficult year, and we don't have the money to maintain these properties. We barely have enough with a fair division of the 17 million. So if the group's not willing to commit to those HMA areas, it doesn't just fall on the county to do it. It falls on the whole group. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone, Harry, has anyone submitted anything in writing? And Josh, has anyone else raised their hand?
Nope. Not seeing any hand raising from the folks on the call.
Okay, so I'll bring it back to this group to try to come to some sort of action. And I would say that, my comment is very similar to what Christy Markey raised, which is, the original transfer of this land to us all for development meant that there were lands that were set aside for habitat, and the county has most of that land, 80%, that responsibility. And so if we want to talk about fairness, in order for us to be FORA and to talk about developing these lands at all, these habitat lands were laid out, and the county got a great deal of that land. And so now to talk about, well, what's fair in terms of distributing this money, what's fair is to distribute it based on the acreage and the responsibility that exists today, regardless of future development. So, I continue to advocate for either option one or, alternative 3 is also, if we want to include the educational institutions. But I just really am saddened by the turn of this conversation to a very odd definition of fairness. So with that, I guess I'll open it up for someone to, well, if there are any other comments, but then we should probably try to craft a motion so that we have a recommendation to make to the FORA board.
see Gail raised her hand.
Great, Gail?
So I just want to comment, Jane, on what you just represented, is that alternative 2, if you look at alternative 2, which was basically the model when we were going to do a base-wide take permit, and that's the structure within which the CFD got set up. So in that model, if you are going to advocate county that this is what you are going to get, I'm going to point out that the county was getting 46.1%. So now you're asking to change the model to say, oh no, we're going to get 80%, 79.9% in alternative 1. And I'm thinking, okay, you're at 46.1%, and because the screen only shows alternative 4, I'm going to use that, but Mr. Malin, I don't know what his percentage came out to, but it's at 42%. That's not that big of a distinction under the totality of the plan as envisioned versus the City of Seaside's proposal. And if that's in fact what the county is arguing, I have a hard time supporting that. If in fact the second question, and I do appreciate that Melanie was indicating, if Marina takes some of their open space lands, there would be an allocation of money going with that. But I don't see how we can keep arguing for a base-wide model when we've never achieved the base-wide HCP. I'm having a hard time with that one. Thank you.
Okay, and I saw Bill Collins raised his hand.
Yeah, hi Josh. I'd like to try to answer Board Member Hoffa's question regarding changes of use. The deeds include land use restrictions, and although they could be changed, the environmental cleanup that was done on the property was specifically to support the reuse identified in the base reuse plan. So changing a piece of property from, say, some sort of a use other than residential to residential would be very problematic, because the munitions cleanup would have to be redone by the recipient and go through the same process as the Army did. So that's very problematic. But changing habitat to development is also problematic. So I just wanted to provide that input.
Thank you, Bill. And you know, one other direction that has come up over the time that we've been discussing this is the idea of properties planned for development that might become habitat, and as a way for sort of paying for management, doing like a habitat conservation acquisition of development property. That would be another kind of opposite land use kind of change that you're talking about, but just so it's not lost. So I guess we're at the point where we're looking for some recommendation, and as we talked about at the beginning, there was the idea that there out of this group could be 2 recommendations made, one from the Habitat Working Group and one from the admin committee. So let's see, there were hands raised, and I think it was, let's see, it was John Gagliotti, then Ian Oglesby, then Alan Hoffa.
Okay, this is John Gagliotti. So I'd like to, to the group, if I could, make a recommendation that we just keep it with the Habitat Working Group. I think we've heard from all the administrators, and just focus on coming up with a recommendation, just in the interest of time. And then the second thing is that I'd like to make that a motion, but I know that there are 2 others who are speaking, so I'll hold from that.
Okay, so was Ian was next?
Yeah, My hand was not raised to say anything. So, yeah, it wasn't for comment. So I don't know what you're looking for now, Josh. Are you looking for the motion?
Well, we're at the point in the meeting where a motion would be helpful from the Habitat Working Group. So, yeah.
Well, I know Alan had his hand raised. I didn't want to jump in front of anybody, so I'll just.
Yeah. And I think John Gagliotti said that he was prepared to make a motion.
Alan?
I was going to make a motion also. I think I'll just do it. So I would move that we recommend what I guess you could call option 5, the seaside proposal. And I recognize that none of these proposals meet everyone's needs. Part of that is because we chose to, the community overall chose to discontinue FORA, and that's created a funding shortfall. So the reality is we don't have enough money. What's fair is really hard to identify in the abstract, because I think there's a lot of truth to what everyone has said from all the different perspectives. But in the end, we have to make a recommendation. And I think from my point of view, the seaside proposal is the most fair. I do, again, hope that the communities, the jurisdictions will work with MPC in particular to help them with management, because I think that's the biggest thing we're missing here. That's my motion, and I'll mute.
I'll second it. John Gagliotti.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Are there any comments? Please raise your hand. Seeing no Habitat Working Group members raising their hands, I guess I'll just comment. I've said before, I think this is not the right approach, and I'm very concerned about this really shortchanging.
I think the chair got muted. I can't hear her.
Yep, looks like. So, Jane, it looks like you cut out there for just a moment. So you.
Okay, so I was just saying, are there any other comments? And I see that Gail Morton has raised her hand. So Gail?
So I just want to remind the county also that the fact is that we're making a recommendation for the distribution of these funds. But again, this doesn't preclude the jurisdictions without FORA that we form our own joint powers agreement in the future, that we determine that the city of Marina wants to bring its portion of any money it's going to get, the county bringing its portion, and let's collaboratively work to make this feasible going forward. This is not a final step, I would say, to the county. This is getting the money out of FORA under the alternative that Mr. Willoughby talked about, which is Marina and FORA would have its joint community facilities district agreement. The county would, and then all of us would then be able to decide what's in our best interest and how do we go forward. So I just ask people to consider that in this motion as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good point. Anyone else wanting to comment before we vote on this motion?
Do you need public comment on the motion or no?
No, the public comment was earlier. So thank you. I don't think we do anyway. All right, so I don't see any hands raised. All those, we will do a roll call vote of the Habitat Working Group, and then if the administrative committee wants to take an action, we'll give you that opportunity. So Harry, if you call the roll for this vote.
Supervisor Jane Parker.
No.
Mayor Ian Oglesby.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton.
Yes.
Councilmember John Gagliotti.
Aye.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Does the administrative committee want to take an action? And I don't know who would take the lead on that, but someone can raise their hand. And I see Dino Pick.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I see no reason, unless my colleagues speak up very quickly, for the admin committee to take any action. We've been part of the deliberation of this body and part of the recommendation as well.
All right. If the other members of the administrative committee want to speak up on Mr. Pick's recommendation that the admin committee take no action, feel free, or I'm going to assume that silence means that you agree with his proposal. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that discussion. We'll move now to the next agenda item, which is looking at the transition plan recommendations. I don't remember that we had anything of substance to do other than the habitat formula. So, but maybe Kendall, you can refresh our memories.
Get Kendall here, give her a second.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Basically, the idea here is that based on the recommendation, we would take this as part of the transition plan recommendations to the board, which would be in the section that relates to the distribution of CFD funds. We would include this language and this portion of it as recommended by the Habitat Working Group at this time, but it would still come back to the board. So there is no further action required for the Habitat Working Group, but it will come to the board for a final approval, as will the distribution of the CFD funds.
Great. And do we know, maybe Josh, this is a question for you or maybe for Kendall, when does this recommendation go before the full board?
I believe that would be at the April 9th meeting, part
Correct.
of the mid-year budget process.
Okay, budget and CIP?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
And
so
we
then,
saw Gail raised her hand, just sorry to interrupt, but Gail raised her hand.
Okay, sure, yes.
Thank you, Chair. The concern that I have to what was just laid out about the time frame that this recommendation would come to the board being in April, and to Mr. Willoughby's responsibility of creating legal documents that would be circulated. We're not going to be able to get all of that done if we wait that duration. So I just would like to make sure, I get that this committee cannot make direction to staff to say, start on these agreements, make it feasible. Is that already within the scope of the work that our legal team is pursuing? Or how do we get this in front of the board sooner? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We're moving forward with that, Gail, just so you know. Basically, we've been working very closely with David and John to figure out what the alternatives might be. So when you look at the calendar now, as you know, you've got a special board meeting this afternoon following the Habitat Working Group. So we've got the meeting on the 9th as being the next regular board meeting. We would be able to bring all these things up. But we do believe that legal counsel will be able to come back with their recommendations, and we will be able to have a substantive discussion so that you'll have the information needed at that time.
Okay, Gail raised her hand again.
I have a follow-up question. So to David Willoughby's comments about the 3 alternatives, and the third alternative under the Mello-Roos Act, he explained was expend the money before sunset. And that the legal staff is also taking a look at that. Would the expending of the money be along the lines of the formula, following through on that? Or if that's the alternative that FORA just spends the money on Christmas presents, and I mean that facetiously, but puts the money to some other organization, why are we spending any legal time on that?
So the CFD funds are going to be spent for habitat. They're not going to be going back into the general fund or anything like that. They're going to be going, based on this recommendation, we're going to put that in the 2020 transition plan. And if this body does not form a JPA between, well, we're going to talk about that next, but if that does not happen, then those funds would be distributed prior to sunset, which would actually relieve some of the legal issues that David and John have been looking at.
So when David was saying expend the money before sunset, what he's making the distinction between is whether the money could be expended, i.e. dispersed to the jurisdictions under some formula, or whether you actually need to create a joint community facilities district contract. That's the distinction.
Yeah, and let's let David answer that directly. He's raised his hand.
By spending the money before sunset, I meant to say that FORA would enter into some form of agreement, possibly not a joint community facilities agreement, but under that third option, some different form of agreement to assure that the habitat work is done and that FORA would pay for that work in advance before it's sunset. So, for example, there might be a contract between FORA and the City of Marina to carry out certain habitat work, and then accompanying that would be a transfer of the money to pay for the work to be done. And if that was accomplished before FORA sunsets, then there wouldn't be remaining CFD funds needing to be distributed because they would have, in that sense, already have been expended.
Thank you for the clarification.
So just to the question about keeping the ball moving, you know, we have a number of agreements kind of in process with each of the jurisdictions. You know, one set is pertaining to the transfer of the CIP project. So we're working with each jurisdiction to do memorandums of agreement on that. And then this would be another set of document agreements that would need to be created, either the joint facilities district I heard there, or a contract option that David just outlined. So we would keep that work going between now and whenever the next, well, the April 9th meeting, so that it's not beginning after a board action, but we're in process. We're very clear that we are getting close to a 90-day time frame to the finish. So we need to get everything done right quick.
Great, thank you. So then we will, so basically the next item on our agenda is a discussion about JPA. This is not actually a decision that FORA, that we need to make as FORA. So I would suggest that people who want to discuss joining a JPA set up a time and place to meet to continue those conversations, and that essentially the work of this Habitat Working Group is done with this recommendation of the Habitat formula. So with that, I want to thank everyone for this intensive meeting schedule and the really good discussions that we have had on these issues, and am prepared to adjourn unless anyone wants to make any final comments.
Yeah, I'll just say from the standpoint of staff, this effort of weekly meetings has been really quite substantial and significant, and we appreciate all of everyone's contributions from the members, from the consulting team, and it does feel like we have at least answered one of the critical questions for this recommendation, and it's another big item to move the ball and help us get to this June 30th fast approaching deadline. So I'll just say from our side, we appreciate the contributions and the opportunity to facilitate this discussion. And I saw Mayor Oglesby raised his hand.
Yeah, I just want to say I want to thank Jane for running this group, and we accomplished a lot. And I know it didn't go the way the county wanted it to go towards the end, but I wanted to thank her for her leadership of allowing all of us to weigh in and tell our side of our stories and just move the process forward. So I wanted to make sure I said that before we close this group out.
And Gail was also raising her hand.
This process has allowed all of us to explore the feasibility of doing what FORA set out to do, figuring out that potentially was not financially feasible. And that was an important discussion for all of us to have in these meetings and going through, could you adapt, could you modify, what could you do to make some base-wide plan effective. And where we finally ended up is truly not the end of anybody's discussion, one would hope, but does allow each of us to understand what we bring to the table. And I look forward to how any organization, if reaching out to each other, wants to go forward with something that is of mutual benefit. So thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, and Alan Hoffa raised his hand.
Yeah, I'd like to also thank Jane. She's done a great job. And I wanted to kind of just end by highlighting something that Gail said earlier, that in a way, what we are recommending here is a worst case scenario. It doesn't mean this is necessarily what will happen. And there is still the opportunity and possibility that some or all of the jurisdictions and agencies will come together with a JPA.
Thanks, everyone. Anyone else wanting to comment as we fold our wings as this group and prepare to reconvene in a little over an hour?
Yeah, I would just make one request to Craig and the city of Seaside with the work that you've done on putting together this alternative, which is appreciated from the results here today, would be to perhaps put down in a half a page description in text the basis for getting to where you are, so that we can offer that to the board to help understand, the full board to help understand how we got here. So that would be super helpful. And then otherwise, yeah, I think we'll be taking a pause and coming back for our special board meeting at 1. So thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks, everyone. We are adjourned.